Hey there, so in this video, I'll be discussing Picard Season 1, Episode 5, Stardust City Rag. At this point, I'm just going episode by episode through Season 1, doing a video for each episode. As far as the title goes, Stardust City Rag, I guess you could say it's a funny little title for a funny little episode. I'm assuming what they mean by rag is a piece of ragtime music, which is a lighthearted genre of music, usually played on the piano, which was something of a precursor to early jazz. You've probably heard a couple of famous pieces like Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag or The Entertainer. And for a lot of people, for myself at least, the biggest association with ragtime would be the classic TV Western. When you walk into a saloon and for ambiance, there's some guy in the corner playing ragtime on the piano. And then fittingly, in this episode, much of the episode takes place in a bar that feels very Wild West. So between the flavor of the lighthearted absurdity in those scenes, and then also the fact that it basically amounts to a Wild West barroom brawl, I guess take those together, that's probably what the title Stardust City Rag is meant to invoke. And then if you want to make a more balanced, full-orbed picture of the episode, maybe you could say the Stardust reference. Maybe that's supposed to conjure up the image of that phaser residue, that blood-like phaser residue, as Bjayzl gets vaporized. So if you want to think of the dark and the lighthearted at the same time when you hear the title. Since I don't think there's actually a location called Stardust City, I think it's just an expressive thing they put in the title. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe there is something. But anyway, so enough on the title. This is one of the lightest and one of the heaviest episodes in the season, I think, at the same time. And I think that's probably intentional. I think the lightheartedness was a very effective way to counterbalance against the heavy parts of the episode. And I particularly felt that way the first time I watched it, when I didn't know what was going to happen. And so you really feel the heaviness and you really feel the lightness, and they go together well because it keeps the thing from being too nasty. So for summary, the episode begins with the Icheb torture scene. Then it moves to Picard having his introductory chat with 7 of 9. And then the team formulates their absurdly colorful mission plan, and they carry it out while Rafi, meanwhile, goes off on her own to try to reconnect with her son and her daughter-in-law. Then back with the team, it's revealed that 7 had vested interest in the plan because she actually knew Bjayzl personally, and she was planning to take her out. The team argues, and then finally everybody leaves with Maddox as per the original plan. 7 gets a couple free phaser rifles from peace-loving Picard and returns to blast Bjayzl. And then for the final scene, Picard gets the info from Maddox about Soji, and Jurati tearfully kills Maddox. Meanwhile, Rafi is most likely still in her quarters, drinking herself to oblivion, but we won't get to see that thread playing out till next episode. So that's Stardust City Rag. It definitely brings up some interesting ethical and relationship-based discussion points. A couple that stand out right away are near the beginning, 7 and Picard's discussion about the ethics of being a Fenris Ranger. Another one, the emotional and relational dynamics between Rafi and her son. And then the big one probably is the ethical issues related to 7 going off to kill Bjayzl. In that early scene with 7 and Picard near the beginning of the episode, I can't help but comment, unrelated to the ethical question, which I said I was going to talk about, but on the way to that, I can't help but comment on how convincing and compelling the portrayal of this new 7 of 9 is, in terms of how the actress manages to pull off a portrayal that really looks like it's the same 7 as we knew back in Voyager, after a lot of off-screen growth, including a lot of emotionally difficult experiences and a lot of just maturing. The portrayal could so easily have gone so badly, but instead it comes across as authentic, real, and very compelling. In a way, it's a lot like the experience that many of us have had of bumping into a 25-year-old who, last time you knew them, was this socially awkward 17-year-old who didn't know how to smile and only spoke in 3-word sentences. 7 wasn't socially awkward because she, was a teen with no friends who spent too much time on the internet. She was socially awkward because she lost her social development years to the Borg. And now in this scene in Star Trek Picard, we see her as somebody who has, over the years, bettered herself by becoming socially adjusted and learning to loosen up a little bit, act less like a robot. But someone who also, in that same time, has become disillusioned with life and society, like so many of the other characters in our story. What everybody in this group has in common is that they're not Starfleet anymore, which is why they find each other. And now what makes Seven different from the others is that she does have, even though she doesn't have Starfleet anymore, she does have her own robust community that she's part of, the Fenris Rangers. Being a Fenris Ranger reflects not just affiliation and, in her case, leadership, but also reflects a lifestyle, a set of values, a code of conduct. Picard comments that he sees this as morally questionable. Later on in the episode, Rafi gives her perspective that says that she admires the movement and Seven for being part of it. You could say we get a concise moral evaluation of the question when we have this little bit of interchange where Picard says he doesn't agree with the concept of taking the law into your own hands, and Seven answers, "What law?" And that's kind of the end of it right there. I guess this is probably the closest we get to an in-depth discussion of the question, but in a concise way, it does inform us a little bit of the issues in question. After Seven says, "What law?" Picard says something to the effect of "point taken" or something like that, suggesting that he may or may not agree with her, but he sees her point and isn't interested in arguing. I think he doesn't really express that he's changed his mind. He's more like he's not willing to keep arguing with her, because that's not why they're together. They're not together to argue the point. You could suggest that Picard's default position on the issue is that the law comes first, and being a moral person means upholding the law and protecting the established society. You could suggest in a parallel way that Seven's default position is that right and wrong come first, and the proper definition of what the law even means is upholding what's right and wrong. So when Seven finds an area of the galaxy where the established government fails to protect the good and correct the evil, she finds it reprehensible to walk away without doing what she can to provide some kind of justice outside of the established law. And of course, this isn't just a sci-fi ethical dilemma, because people throughout the ages have perennially had to ask the question of how to live morally and justly when the system of justice fails to be just. Maybe one of the most talked about examples in recent modern history would be some of the events that happened in Nazi Germany, where a lot of citizens had to choose between being loyal German citizens or becoming lawless to do what's right. Or to go a little further back in history and move over to America, you might think about the operators of the Underground Railroad, who also stepped outside of the established rules of society in order to uphold the kind of moral rightness that the government failed to recognize. What makes these ethical dilemmas so difficult is that they're so similar to other situations where similar behaviors would be very problematic. To take the way Picard puts it, taking the law into your own hands. So to take another example that would be a little on the other side, let's take a Wild West example, since this episode does have a bit of a Wild West flavor. And think of the classic Wild West lynch mob. They think they're doing what's right, but they're putting their own imperfect sense of what's right. They're putting that over the established system that has been carefully designed to protect justice with a minimum of misfires and tragedies, to protect the good and correct the evil. And in going against that, they're following their own misguided conscience and doing wrong in the name of right. So all that to say, it's an ethical question that we can't afford to just brush over, because right and wrong do matter, and systems of justice matter too. Moving on to another really meaningful scene. That scene with Rafi and her son is quite a compelling bit of reveal for our story. In a way, it's kind of like an extension of some of the repeated themes we've already seen earlier in the series in the life of Picard, in the sense that life keeps on going even when you want to stop. In Rafi's case, just like with Picard, the devastating and disillusioning events that they experienced that ruined their lives, those events resulted in both Picard and Rafi, in their own way, neglecting important relationships in their lives. In Picard's case, you could say it partly happened because he was just so angry and depressed and sick of everything, so he retreated from life and isolated himself, and he neglected these relationships. He burned some bridges on the way, stuff like that. In Rafi's case, it seems that she became so emotionally out of control and so obsessed with her conspiracy theories that she became this distracted, unavailable, emotionally unstable mother and an addict, not to mention. So that now when what her son remembers is that he used to long for her to be part of his life in a meaningful way. But now that longing has been replaced with seething resentment. And maybe to a certain extent, this is kind of an extended defense mechanism, within him to keep him from being hurt by her more in the future. And at the same time, maybe even just kind of a legitimate recognition of the fact that she is, or has been, a unreliable, unstable element in his life that can kind of be counted on to hurt him more. In a way, you could say she chose, without particularly intending to, she chose her obsessions over her closest relationships. And now she's this broken woman torn between her addictions, her obsessions, and these precious relationships that she may never get back. It's really painful to watch her fail his test, the test he gave her when he made these emotionally charged references to her conspiracy theories. And then she failed the test by completely dropping her humble, penitent mother role in order to loudly and angrily defend her conspiracy claims. And what she did when she failed that test was she accidentally reaffirmed to him the fact that she still loves her obsessions more than she loves him. And no amount of regret that's spilling out of her, that's not enough to give her the restraint and commitment that would make her the stable, reliable person that she says she wants to be. I think also a big part of what makes this scene so compelling is that it's the secret scene. Because the other characters don't know this side of Rafi. She wouldn't tell anyone where she was going. They only get to see her with her tough exterior and her, being unashamed of her vices and having this cavalier attitude and her anger and all that. But here we get to see the secret side of Rafi, the meeting she wouldn't tell anyone about. And she's quite a different woman from the one we see on the bridge of the La Serena. And that happens from the very moment she lays eyes on her son. From that moment, her toughness disappears and it's replaced with this vulnerable softness and this flood of emotions that she's kept repressed for so long. And now suddenly she just can't keep it repressed anymore. She can't keep control because this is her open wound. And then, of course, there's the big emphatic center of the episode, you might say, which is Seven killing Bjayzl. I think you could definitely say this is probably the center of the episode, and it's very much set up as an ethical dilemma that is crafted to be impactful. I've heard some people give some pretty severe criticisms for the opening scene of the episode with Icheb, as though it's kind of an unnecessary scene that serves no purpose. Now, I definitely agree to a certain extent with the criticisms when they say it's excessive. I think it is a bit excessive. How they do it, especially for those of us who think of Star Trek as, the familiar, family-friendly, Trek kind of thing. But you got to say, it definitely plays a vital role in the story. I also think in that scene, I think Seven's line at the end of it, when she says something to the effect of "my child, Icheb" or something like that, I think it sounds, kind of corny because no version of the Seven character would say that like that. And so it comes across as kind of cheesy and bizarre, like over exposition. Like they're trying to spoon feed you the fact that Seven feels that way about Icheb. But that said, you can't really criticize a scene as unnecessary because it's absolutely necessary for the story structure. It's placed there as intentionally horrible as possible in order to set up the revenge scene that's going to come, which provides the ethical dilemma that is the core of the episode. By giving Seven a compelling reason to kill Bjayzl, the writers serve us an intriguing contrast on a silver platter. We get to see the shiny, idealized ethics of classic Trek as represented by Picard when he objects, and we get to see that in contrast to the gritty, disgruntled, sliding ethics that Seven represents, and which a lot of real people also represent. Something similar happened a little bit in terms of that contrast. Something similar happened last episode when Elnor beheaded the Romulan on Vashti to save Picard's life. And then Picard, just as soon as they finish the beam out, Picard gives this startlingly harsh rebuke to him for it. And in a way, you could say Elnor kind of did the natural thing that a justice fighter would do out in the wild, wild west. When you're in a gunfight and the stakes are high, you shoot to kill. Elnor did what all the Wild West gunfighters would do. But Picard represents, on the other hand, classic Star Trek ethics, which are much more ideal and pristine in that sense. To quote from the doctor from Voyager, the doctor said, "Killing is wrong no matter who's doing it." And he said that with passion. I think it was in some context related to capital punishment, something like that. Now, in the case of Seven and Bjayzl, when Picard lifts up that eye patch and he looks at Seven and realizes, as she puts it, I think she says, "I haven't been exactly candid," or something like that. I remember the word candid was in there because absolute candor is kind of the, the catchword there. But anyway, when he lifts up his eye patch and he sees the world, he sees what's going on, he immediately identifies Seven's intentions and Seven's behavior as a classic case of revenge seeking and murder. That's the category Picard puts it in. He says something to the effect of, this isn't about justice, it's just settling an old score, something to that effect. So to Picard, it's kind of cut and dried and simple. It's not unlike the moral mistake that Picard made back in First Contact when he discovered that he had become Captain Ahab. He had become a revenge seeker in denial, so consumed with lust for vengeance that he would have led his own people to their own death just to feed his bloodlust a little more and just to avoid turning tail from the Borg. It would have been pretty simple if Picard could have just said to Seven, "Killing and revenge are always wrong in every circumstance. This is the dictum." If he could have just made that the truth for Seven. But it would have been another matter entirely for him to try to prove to Seven that that's the case. Or for that matter, to prove it perhaps to the viewer. Part of the importance of the setup and the way this episode has been crafted, in terms of the way we watched Icheb being tortured, is that the watcher is going to have a lot of difficulty agreeing with Picard that the morally right thing to do is to allow Bjayzl and her chronic behaviors to go on unchecked. You can't help recognizing that whatever your views are on the very difficult ethical questions involved, these are difficult ethical questions. And it becomes clear that Seven's seemingly immoral actions have at least the appearance of being the best possible remedy at this point that's available for a gross chronic evil, namely the behaviors of Bjayzl and her team. I think moral dilemmas like this one force us to ask the question, on what basis do we have our most cherished moral convictions in the first place? These ones that stand out as the moral convictions on which the rest of them stand, because we certainly don't want to open ourselves up to a freely sliding morality that, can go wherever we feel it ought to go. After all, Bjayzl and her team probably have their own morality, which centers on possibly the primacy of the evolution of the people on the top of the pile, the technological advancement of the people on the top of the pile, with the, maybe they have a strong commitment to being loyal within their own little tribe. I'm sure Bjayzl and her team have very strong moral convictions, which include you can torture certain people, So while the setup, on the one hand, forms an inherent challenge to classic Trek morality, I don't think you could say at all that it's suggesting that there's not an actual right and wrong, or suggesting that every morality is equal. Certainly not. Instead, it's asking a question, and it's leaving the question in the air unanswered for us to examine ourselves. It invites thought and challenges our assumptions without giving a tidy answer that would settle our anxieties. So anyway, that's the big part of the episode. The other big shocking part of the episode is at the very end when Jurati kills Maddox. It's definitely shocking. So when you add up all the shocking bits in the episode as a whole, it's quite a heavy episode, which is, I think, why they very intentionally made the middle part so lighthearted, why they made this the rag, made it into a jovial ragtime rag, as it were, because Picard, Star Trek Picard, generally speaking, isn't this gritty show that, you want to groan every time you sit down to watch it. So we need a little, when we get some nastiness, we need a little break from it. And I think they did that well. In the Jurati scene at the end, I think the actress does a great job portraying in Girardi someone who has been so deeply traumatized and confused that she has completely lost her center. And it's definitely the case that intense traumatic memories can have a disastrous effect on someone's ability to think clearly. In Girardi's case, you could suggest that the intense trauma from that mind meld has created mental blocks so strong that she's not able to think about or process any of the facts or evidence related to the subject. Instead, she just knows on an experiential level that she has to follow O's directives or terrible things are going to happen to everyone. So she's got feelings, sickening, overwhelming feelings that are so strong that they shut off everything else. She's got the feelings, but she's got no careful thoughts because she can't think through those blocks. She can't think through the blocks of those traumatic experiences. So in ways like she knows without having the freedom to explore why she knows or if she knows, if that makes sense. The brainwashing aspect reminds me a little bit of the Next Generation episode, The Mind's Eye, in which Geordi is brainwashed by Romulans through exposure to traumatic images, and so he's turned into a killing machine. It also reminds me of the Voyager episode, Random Thoughts, in which Tuvok manages to immobilize a telepathic alien who was trying to steal his memories. He's able to immobilize him by overwhelming him with all the darkest and most negative thoughts. And really, the fact is that thoughts and memories are powerful, and traumatic stress, such as the kind involved in PTSD, can really cripple even the best of us. So anyway, that's Stardust City Rag. A lot of heavy stuff, some really light stuff, but definitely a lot of heavy stuff, as well as a lot of threads that leave unanswered questions for the following episodes to explore. Next up in my series of videos here, I'll be discussing Season 1, Episode 6. The next one, The Impossible Box.